Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. My name is Mimi, and I have my glorious partner in life and love with me here.
What is going on, everybody? This is Chase. We are super stoked today. We have a very special guest, a friend of ours that we've gotten to know here. We actually just saw him in person here a couple months ago at a Paul Chek workshop. Greg, welcome to the Medicine Podcast, my friend.
Thank you both for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah, and this is a topic we've touched on here and there, this broader topic of holistic mental health and what that actually means. And so we're so excited to bring a deeper conversation to our listeners because we really haven't had too many mental health experts on the show. So I think it's going to be really refreshing to our listeners. And of course, we've listened to you on multiple different podcasts. Obviously, we know you as a friend and in person, and you have such just a wealth of knowledge and tools to offer the world. So we're super excited to jump in.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first question that we ask every guest on the medicine is, what do you love in your life? What aspect of your life do you love so much that you wish you could gift it to every human?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's juicy.
That's
juicy right off the bat. What do I love so much in my life that I would love to gift to another being? I would say the number one thing that I would love to gift to every human being that I feel like at this time in my life I have, it's a sense of meaning and purpose. I think that's probably like the missing ingredient in so many people's lives, is like when you wake up in the morning feeling as though you have meaning and you have purpose. And I think across the board, when it comes to staying healthy, I feel as though that's the ingredient that gives you a reason to be healthy. There's so many reasons why we end up self-sabotaging and playing the victim and disempowering ourselves, not taking good care of ourselves. But when we have meaning and purpose in our life, we have enough skin in the game to want to take care of ourselves and to want to be at our best. So that would be the number one thing that I would gift to anybody.
Dude, I love that. We were just talking about this last night. I think it's Paul that says, if you don't have a dream, you have a crisis. And having that purpose, having that vision, having that dream, it's not going to eliminate fear. It's not going to eliminate stress. It's not going to eliminate the compulsion to compartmentalize your life and try to control every aspect of it. But what it's going to do is it's going to be such a powerful energy that it actually supersedes those feelings and allows you the opportunity to work with them and through them because you're so compelled towards your purpose, towards your dream. And so like that just resonates wildly.
Yeah, I mean, we have, just for the listeners, you were one of the OG clients that worked with Paul Chek, and you've worked with him for years and years now, and we've been working with him for the last few years. And I think something that has been resounding is exactly what you're saying. I feel like it's exactly how you stated it. Like it's the missing link for a lot of people. And certainly in our life, it's talking about what is our dream individually and as a unit. What do we want to accomplish in our personal lives? What do we want to give to the world? And it really does just provide this guiding light of a big why in your life. And being able to ask the question whenever you go into a new business opportunity or health challenge or whatever it may be, is this supportive of my greater purpose and legacy that I want to leave the world? And it really has been, certainly for us, and I'm sure for you as well, like a guiding light that feels like you can always come back to as a sort of anchor in your life.
Absolutely. And in a partnership too. I can say that I have that with my girlfriends. And I mean, we've started teaching together and facilitating healing workshops and shared a lot of clients and patients. And so having also a partnership with a shared sense of purpose and mission is very powerful as well. So it's beautiful to share this space with you guys and kind of resonate at that frequency too, where it's it's multiplied.
Definitely.
Absolutely. That energy for sure.
Absolutely. Getting into a few more questions as we just get to know you a little bit. How do you interact with the divine or God or your higher self, however you articulate that or define that? What does interacting with the divine look like for you in your life?
It's funny how that has evolved over time. And looking back at the way I used to interact and communicate with the divine. So I'll give you a quick little background. So a lot of the work that I've done over the last few years has been diving deep into archetypes. And I've been studying a lot of Caroline Myss's work, who wrote Sacred Contracts. And she has what's called the 12 archetype wheel. And a lot of the work I do with myself and my clients is casting our archetype wheel and seeing which archetype shows up in which different aspect of our life. So on this wheel, there's 12 houses, and each house represents a different area of your life. And the 9th house on the archetype wheel is called the house of spirituality, which is all about how you relate to your spiritual life and that which you consider God or source. So according to Caroline Myss, we all have 4 survival archetypes, right? We all have a child, a victim, a saboteur, and a prostitute. And when I casted my archetype wheel in my house of spirituality, I have the prostitute archetype, which was really fascinating for me to dive into. And remember, the prostitute archetype is the part of us that compromises ourselves, is constantly negotiating, and or taking advantage of, allowing ourselves to be taken advantage of. So like not a very high level of self-worth, so to speak. So on this wheel, I had the spiritual prostitute, which was so interesting. And when I dove into it, I realized that in the past, on the shadow side, a lot of my communication with God or source was a form of negotiation. And you realize that so much of our prayer life, until we grow conscious, is literally spiritual negotiation of God. If you give me this, I promise I'll do this. Right?
I'll
so
never
it's
do
all
this again.
Yeah. So it's all a form of negotiation out of like this desperate attempt to try and control and micromanage our reality. And that's where most people's prayer life stops. So it took me really diving into that deep like archetypal work, which is a lot of like shadow work, to look at that, being like, holy shit, I'm a spiritual hooker, basically. Right?
I'm going to take that sound bite.
Yeah. And I had to really get honest and clear with myself. And that's why, when I worked with Paul, literally our first session was like getting clear what God is. And that's the Imago Dei archetype. That's the original archetype, the image of God that you hold inside of yourself. So now my relationship with God or source is a much more silent one. It's much more of it's an act of surrender, and it's an act of curiosity. And it's not as much a desperate attempt for certainty. I think that's where we go wrong, is we exchange curiosity for certainty so our spiritual ego can feel in control. So that's what I've really had to heal in myself, and really come to the place that, there's only one being here, and it's experiencing itself in infinite forms and infinite expressions. And that awareness has allowed me to heal a lot of the guilt, a lot of the shame, a lot of the aspects of myself that I've held against myself, thinking that there's an off-planet God watching over me and judging me all the time. And what you realize is that your relationship with God, until you do the healing work, is very often a mirror of your relationship with your parents. Because you project God as a parent figure rather than it's actually you. Like you're it. That's why like St. Francis of Assisi would say, what you're looking for is what's looking. When they would ask, how do I find God? So my relationship with source has really evolved in that way, where I've healed a lot of that. I've healed a lot of that need for certainty, that negotiation, that kind of like spiritual ego's control mechanisms. And it's been much more of a practice of deep surrender. And it's a deep surrender also to the mystery. And in my last plant medicine ceremony that I participated in a few months ago, which was the first time I did any plant medicine in many years. I had taken some years off, and the first like couple hours of it was just like me getting completely annihilated, and spirit basically saying to you, like, Greg, you don't know anything. Like you thought you knew what was going on. Like, you don't know a damn thing. And it was just like completely like just breaking down every idea, every belief system, any sort of like mental construct that I had built up, just gone. And it was just like, my relationship with God or source now is that of humility. You know, it's that, you know, I feel a connection to source, but do I really know what's going on? Apparently not. You know,
yeah, and I think that's the point. We've talked
that
about
is
this
the point. Yeah,
on our show many times. Our listeners are not new to this concept that we hold very dear, that like the point is the discovery, the point is the unfolding, the point is the unknown.
Yeah,
for sure. And I think, I mean, what you're saying is certainly resonating with us, coming from a religious, you know, pretty dogmatic, I could use that word, background. And then, you know, we had to go through our rock bottom of divorce and complete annihilation in a different way, not related to plant medicine at this time, but like we had to let go of everything and then really ask ourselves, like, what do we want to experience? And then from there, curiosity, compassion, and less shame, judgment, guilt. So everything that you're saying is like speaking directly to my heart, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, growing up evangelical Christian, you're literally taught that it is this sort of like formula of exchange to be able to wipe away your sins and be granted access into the pearly gates of heaven. And I think you build in that pattern of having a sort of exchange with a higher power in order to get what you want in life or get what you want after death. It's funny, I think that relationship turns people, you know, one of two ways. One way, which is, yo, this Santa Claus like guy isn't getting me what I want, so I don't believe in this anymore. Or it's, oh my God, I'm not doing enough. I better flog myself to eternity and completely self-deprecate in front of the Almighty, causing a host of different, you know, self-love issues and the like. And so it's such a tough kind of like formula to break out of, especially if you come from that background. But I can absolutely see that it you know, is possible in all of these different ways that we're describing. You know, in all of your coaching and your own research and even a little bit what we were talking about before we hit record, what for you currently is an area that you're working on, something that's coming up in your life that you're actively pushing through, whether that's to learn or to study or to just something else that you're putting in your tool belt now, having done already a ton of work in your life, but is really coming up for you in this moment?
So there's a lot. There's always a lot. But, you know, my healing journey, you know, when I was younger, I started out very much kind of like in my masculine nature. I was always very athletic, like sports was how I expressed myself. My body was how I expressed myself. Like I was always kind of in my kind of very masculine nature. And that's how I really felt seen and validated by the outer world. And a lot of my healing journey was really about reconnecting with my feminine nature. That's something that Paul really helped guide me through, was reconnecting with the feminine aspects of myself that I had avoided and disassociated from for so long. And that real act of surrender really brought me into my own feminine nature. And over the course of that journey, I even lost like 40 pounds a lot of like muscle mass. I went from like looking like an athlete to people asking me like, are you sick? Like, do you, I even used to get like, do you have cancer, or did you go vegan? Like I used to get all sorts of questions. But what that journey really was for me in terms of my physical body was I used so much of my muscle mass as a hiding spot, as a form of armoring. And I lost a lot of weight and reconnected with my feminine nature. I reconnected with my soul nature, which is a very kind of like quiet, sensitive, empathic individual. I am much more feminine in nature than I am masculine. But over the last year or so, especially the last few months, my journey has been a lot about reclaiming the masculinity that I had left behind for a while. Because I found myself really in tune with my feminine nature, but starting to feel very disempowered, starting to feel almost like the wounded feminine, like that kind of victimhood, like being like overly sensitive, overly empathic, not really in my power. So, and this has shown up in my intimate relationships and in my work. And I even noticed that the first half of my career, most of my clients were women. Why? Because one, I always felt safer with my mother than my father. So it was always easier for me to connect to women than to connect to men. And now that's actually changing. Now I actually have more male clients than I do female clients. And it's just a reflection of where I'm at in relationship to my own masculine and feminine nature. Yeah. So it's very interesting how your work, career life, everything outside of you is always mirroring back to you some sort of internal process. So that's been a huge part of my journey right now, is really kind of reclaiming my power in that way and really allowing myself to express my masculinity and not apologize for it. Yeah. You know, I think, you know, I had this spiritual ego that kind of like softened into the feminine, but I really lost the other half of myself, you know, so it's been about a real kind of rebalancing in that way. So now I can actually go to the gym and lift weights, but allow it to be from a place of self-love rather than self-rejection. Yeah. And really, it's kind of like that kind of return back home where I'm engaging those parts of myself that I had left behind, but in a totally different way. So that's been a huge aspect of my journey right now.
Yeah, that's so great. And I think the world at large is ready for, asking for, inviting even a new definition, a new transmission of masculinity, because what maybe you were explaining and what you experienced earlier in your life, you're kind of using your body, your strength, like physical strength, to kind of mask. I think the world at large has experienced that just with masculinity through, you know, thousands of years, really being sort of dominating and control based and, you know, outward strength based. And we just had John Wineland on recently, and he's a major proponent of how do we usher in a new definition of masculinity, and exactly what you're talking about. It's more of a transmission. It's a gift of consciousness, stillness, groundedness, rather than push, manipulate, control, dominate. And I feel that from you. And I also experience it in my own partnership with your story, Chase, and how you show up today is very different than how you showed up maybe at 21 years old.
Yeah. And there's I'm similarly like athlete background, very intense youth athletics, played college basketball, and I was a gentle kid. I was very introverted, like brutally shy actually. And I wasn't able to find, you know, my own identity until it was on the basketball court and, you know, a couple other arenas. And oddly enough, I was insecure about that gentleness, that tenderness, you know, buried it, and it actually resulted in being quite aggressive in my athletics and then in my early career, to the point that I similarly was like healing this masculinity and in the process built and got to showcase more of a balanced feminine. But I really, really feel that as I'm now 32 years old and working with the clear and very evident need of depth and groundedness and strength in our world that is lacking balanced masculinity. And so I feel that I think it's extremely relevant for not only just men, but women. What is that masculinity that in 2022 is so desired and ready for? And I think we can all like get in tune with what that could be and start, really showing up.
Yeah, I love John Wineland's permission slip to just get rid of the word masculine and call it consciousness, or call it breath or groundedness. I resonate with that because it's almost like the word masculinity has this, even though in and of itself it's not bad or negative or anything, it just is. But we've almost ascribed this negative, toxic word, this toxic descriptor word around masculinity. And it's like we almost need a whole new word in general to really portray what people like you and Chase and other guests that we've had on here, like what they're trying to invite into our world is something completely different than what maybe the average person thinks of masculinity.
Yeah. And, one of the ways that I've worked with it in myself is, if you think about just like this spectrum, on one side of the spectrum, you have power, and on the other side, you have humility, right? And you could say power is the masculine energy, and humility, we could say, is the feminine energy. And we want to kind of like find that middle ground where it's like empowered humility, where I'm in my power, but I also have humility, where I'm not all power, no humility, where I'm, controlling, destructive. Like that's kind of the toxic masculinity, is all power, no humility. Yeah. And then there's the wounded feminine, which is all humility, no power, where you're disempowered, you're always throwing yourself under the bus. You're kind of like that kind of shadow side of the empath, where you're like not really fully engaged. You're not really in yourself. You don't have clear boundaries in your life. So it's for me, it's really that balance between power and humility, where I kind of find that masculine, feminine kind of interplay.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way to look at it. I love those words too. We've talked a little bit about your background. So just for our listeners, you have an incredible story. Without making you retell every single little detail of the past 30-something years of your life.
Sure.
Can you explain, a little bit more into your background and how helping others heal their mind became part of your legacy and gift and purpose in the world?
Sure. Well, I appreciated what Chase was sharing, about your journey, which is, I was a super quiet child. It's like I never spoke. Like I was bullied a lot for never using my voice. Like I was always introduced as like, oh, this is Greg, but he doesn't speak. And so from a very young age, it was always athletics. It was always my body. It was like the only way that I felt seen and validated. So my dream was always to play on the PGA Tour. So I left home at 16. I went to a golf and tennis academy. I got a Division I scholarship to play at the University of Houston. And then halfway through my freshman year there, I experienced a physical trauma and I had to go in for surgery. And as I came out of anesthesia was when I started experiencing a lot of like obsessive compulsive patterns, a lot of looping intrusive thought patterns, a lot of anxiety. And that really kind of set me on a different path, where it went from like pursuing athletics 100% of the time to, holy shit, I just got thrown into a whole new reality. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. And I just took a deep dive into really figuring out what was going on. And what I could say honestly is that it was really challenging during that time. This was like late teens, early 20s. And the one thing that really supported me was I always felt this sense inside of me that what I'm going through, there's purpose here. there's really some purpose in why I'm working through this. And I would just dive into, all sorts of meditation and mindfulness-based practices. And I really started to take the initiative and kind of take the healing into my own hands. And that's when I seeked out Paul, and Paul took me on as a client. And that was a good 5-6 years of a lot of deep struggle and really diving into myself and really spending a lot less time outward oriented, because initially when all of this stuff got activated, I tried to push more outward because it was how I escaped myself. It was how I avoided myself. It was training harder, working out more time in the gym, more time studying. It was all how I avoided what was going on inside of me. And eventually I couldn't do that anymore, because I was carrying around so many socially approved addictions.
I know.
Right?
Oh my God,
they're like
yes.
socially approvable addictions that I was carrying around just as a desperate attempt to avoid the parts of myself that I wasn't willing to feel. And that eventually ran its course, as it always does. And that's when I kind of rerouted myself inward. And obviously Paul was, the trail guide on that journey, on that expedition. And that really gave me a strong sense of purpose. And Paul would always say to me, like, Greg, this is not therapy. This is your internship. Because everything I'm teaching you, you're going to be sharing and teaching all of your students and clients and whoever you work with. And he was right. And that's I think why, even in the beginning stages of a lot of that struggle, I knew like there's something here. There's something that I'm meant to learn here. And there's no way I just woke up out of anesthesia with all of these challenges for no reason. Like there has to be some sort of meaning behind it. And I was always connected to that, which I think was a great blessing, because a lot of times it's easy for us to fall into that kind of victimhood narrative. But I can honestly say that if I did fall into it, I never really stayed there.
Yeah.
So that was a real blessing that I always carried with me.
I'm curious if you've found in your work, is the impetus or the kind of trigger for a lot of people's mental health issues, is it a big event like a surgery and coming out of anesthesia, a major life shift? Like, is that a theme that you see with your clients, that some of these things are sort of turned on by a major transition or traumatic life event?
A lot of times, yes, but not always. There usually is some experience that is the kind of turning point, but it's a lot of times it's not a major event that people consciously remember. A lot of times when you actually go into it, it was an event that they may not have thought was a major experience, but looking back, they could see how, I could see how that experience, like you guys were talking about, religion and some of the challenges around that. Like I've worked with so many clients whose obsessive compulsive patterns were a result of a lot of religious teachings in their upbringing. And I wouldn't say like there was like a huge trauma, but there were, for example, experiences of like maybe someone was having some homosexual thoughts when they were, going through their kind of developmental years, and they go to church and they hear that, that's a sin, or, whatever they're told is okay or not okay. So now they start kind of like questioning themselves, like I shouldn't be having these thoughts. And they start kind of like resisting them, because when they have the thought, they start feeling guilt, and the guilt is uncomfortable to feel. So it's like, okay, I can't think that anymore. But the old saying, what you resist persists. So now, since there's an unprocessed emotion, there's a looping thought pattern associated with it. So a lot of times it's just like this progression that happens. But sure, is there an event? Yeah, the event was the first time that they heard that the thought that they had was a sin. but I wouldn't say that they experience that as like a huge trauma, but it is a trauma because that's what the trigger really was. So there usually is some experience that starts to kind of begin that process, but not always. And a lot of times, it could be more related to the body. Like someone over time can be, eating a lot of processed carbs and sugar, and their gut flora gets disrupted, and now their whole neurotransmitter profile is disrupted, and now they have a lot of anxiety or depression or kind of like ADHD, but it's really just the biochemistry in your body started to shift, and your mind can be only as healthy as the body that it's living in. So, there's so many factors and variables that play a role that it's really, sometimes there is a major trauma, but that's not always the case.
Yeah. Kind of breaking this open a little bit as it pertains to these terms that we hear like all the time. It's almost like on people's like social media profiles now, like, hey, I've got anxiety, or I'm compulsive, or I have depression, because it's so prevalent. And I think we hear these terms all the time: anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD. Let's zoom out a little bit and maybe have you define what those mean, and then what some of the examples, either in your life or some of the people that you work with, how that plays out. I think, even for me, as I've learned more about just compulsive behavior, I'm like, oh my God, I have legitimately had obsessive compulsive tendencies, more grand than I ever thought in my life, and probably still to this day. So maybe if we can kind of define and give examples of these different lanes,
sure,
that'd be great.
Well, they each have different symptom profiles, but a lot of times the root causes are of the same source, right? And I think it may have been Carl Jung. Usually if there's a quote and you say it's Carl Jung, there's like a 50% chance you're right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I remember reading this quote that said, all mental illness is the avoidance of a deeper suffering. And that always hit home with me, because a lot of times, whether it was I was struggling with anxiety, if we start with anxiety, because that's, I would say, the most common across the board is the experience of anxiety. A lot of people say, I feel anxious. And one day I was just kind of like sitting with that. I'm like, is anxiety actually a feeling? Or is it the avoidance of feeling? And that's what I really came across, is anxiety is not a feeling. Anxiety is the attempt to avoid feeling.
Wow, that's good.
Right? So if you're feeling anxious, the experience of anxiety is basically, when someone's experiencing anxiety, they're trying to jump outside of themselves. But the old saying, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
So the anxiety is wherever you go, you're following yourself. So that attempt to jump outside of yourself and avoid a feeling that's right underneath the surface. It could be guilt. It could be shame. It could be fear. It could be sadness. It could be grief. But in reality, most mental health challenges are really how we try and avoid a feeling or emotion that feels uncomfortable. And if you take obsessive compulsive disorder, where people have, looping thoughts, intrusive thoughts, obsessive compulsive, like checking different patterns. We all know, I would say most of your listeners know kind of like the term emotion as energy in motion.
Yeah.
Right? So if you think about an emotion as energy moving through your body, and when you're healthy and grounded and in your body, you're feeling that energy. And it's moving through you just like food moves through your digestive system. You digest it, you metabolize it, and then you have a nice bowel movement and you kind of move it out of you. Emotions kind of work in the same way if you let them move freely. But what happens is, a lot of times there's emotions that we don't want to feel. So what happens is that energy is no longer in motion. And we know from our science classes where we were taught that energy can never be created or destroyed, only transferred, right? So that energy that's no longer in motion in your body has to go somewhere else. So it usually goes through the mind. And that's where people have a lot of kind of looping thoughts, racing thoughts. They can't quiet their mind. It's because the mental activity is kind of like the release valve for the built up energy that you weren't feeling. So that energy was no longer in motion, but it has to go somewhere. It's almost like your body's the soda bottle that you shook up, and your mind, you pull the cap off, and there's the release valve. So most OCD is simply a release valve that's a result of a pressure buildup that was simply born out of the unwillingness to feel something. So that's really how I describe OCD. Is it's really the release valve of that energetic windup. And the anxiety is also the avoidance of whatever that feeling is. So most people that have OCD experience anxiety. The two kind of go hand in hand. So yeah, it's all, in a nutshell, the avoidance of an experience inside of you that's uncomfortable, right? And the ego has this idea that if I feel this, there's a chance it's never going to leave, right? So if I let this in, what if it never leaves? If I start feeling this, what if it never stops? You know, this is why Buddha taught the law of impermanence. You know, if this too shall pass, if whatever you're experiencing, it's impermanent. But the ego doesn't really know that. The ego doesn't realize that. So it's like, if I let this in, it's never going to leave. So let's avoid it at all costs. And now the anxiety, the OCD, you know, all of that is very prevalent during that process.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about depression? How would you categorize or define that? I feel like that's a word that gets thrown around. It's almost like this, to me anyways, and I'm not an expert, but it seems like it's almost this umbrella term that a lot of things that are maybe unknown, kind of like the term IBS, where it's like, well, there's irritation in your body. It's like, okay, well, no shit. And can you explain the term depression and kind of what it means to you and how it shows up for people?
Yeah. So I have a couple different perspectives when it comes to depression. The first is, a lot of people say, I'm depressed, or I feel depressed. And if you really listen to that word depressed, there's two words in there. And the two words are deep rest. When I say I'm depressed, what I hear is deep rest. So one of what I think is one of the major causes of depression is when people are actually supposed to go into a rest cycle. But because of our culture that's so like productivity driven, they don't actually allow themselves to go into, let's call it winter, right? If summer is where you're taking action and winter is where you're resting, most people don't really give themselves permission to fully go into winter. And I think a lot of people's depression is really the avoidance of that natural rhythm and cycle. So I think the experience of depression for some people is actually a healthy process of going into the winter cycle, which is kind of like a death process that then leads to rebirth, right? So if you have spring, summer, fall, winter, fall going into winter is kind of like sometimes a feeling of depression. But if you just surrender to it and go into it, you're going to emerge from it in a rebirth process, right? So if you think about like the four seasons as like spring is birth, summer is growth, fall would be kind of like the wrap-up phase, and winter would be the death process. If you're not actually honoring all four of those, it's very easy to go into depression. And depression is actually the resistance that you put up against that natural process. So I think that's, and Paul teaches a lot about that in his work, which is really honoring the seasons, right? And most of people's struggle is where they're so addicted to summer that they forget that winter is just as important.
Yeah.
And I've heard Paul say a lot of times to people, you've been in summer for 5 years, you have 5 winters to pay back.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Wow.
So a lot of the depression is the natural rhythms that need to be honored. And when we avoid that process, it shows up in that way. Also, I think a lot of depression is really the feeling of disempowerment, right? So depressed and disempowered a lot of times feel very similar. And that's where exploring the survival archetypes are really helpful, because the 4 survival archetypes that we talked about earlier, the saboteur, the victim, the child, the prostitute, those are all your relationship with your power. And a lot of times there's reasons and ways in which we give our power away, whether it's in self-sabotage, playing the victim role, playing the shadow side of the child, or prostituting ourselves. So there's a part of us on a soul level that knows we're giving our power away, but our ego continues to do it because it feels safe and familiar. Where it's like giving my power away is actually how I ensure my own safety and security and survival, but I know I'm not really living. Mm-hmm. So it's almost a form of like self-betrayal. Yeah. And I think that's a huge source of depression, is when we're giving our power away through those 4 survival archetypes.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to the 4 survival archetypes and get into each one a little bit further. I want to come back to kind of the depression and anxiety and how they show up and manifest. I think it was from you that I heard, and maybe it was on another podcast or maybe in the course, that depression is more of a feminine experience and anxiety is more of a masculine experience. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so they're kind of 2 sides of one coin, where anxiety is much more of like the outward going energy, and the depression's more of like the turning inward. And I think most people start with anxiety, where there's something going on inside of them, and instead of actually addressing it, they project their attention and their energy so outward that that's the anxiety process. But eventually that all burns out. And once it burns out, then it retreats inward, and it's the experience of depression. So I think a lot of times most people start with anxiety as a way of trying to escape themselves. And then once you can no longer do that, then it becomes like this unhealthy surrender, which is like the turning inward or the folding inward, but it's usually in the form of victimhood. It's usually in the form of disempowerment. It's not like a curiosity of let me go inward and explore. Right. It's more, I don't have the energy to avoid myself anymore. Yeah. So now I have to go inward. And eventually that usually leads to kind of like the dark night of the soul and coming out of it. So one can say it's actually an important part of the process, but that's usually how it kind of manifests from my experience.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And just sharing a little bit of my background. Mentioned I was an athlete, and so I always had some sort of like, it's very superstitions and compulsions are like very common in athletics. Training regimens and routines are critical to your success, and oftentimes you see that feedback loop of being quite ritualistic in nature and having something turn into being successful and seeing that it's rewarding, and so you double down and you build more routines and more rituals. I obviously get through athletics. We get married. I start a very fast-paced financial consulting career. I'm traveling all the time. It's very high intensity, and my exercise habits just pick up. It's 5 a.m. workouts every single day. It's a very regimented eating schedule. Trying to stay lean and physically look a particular way. But we get divorced. This sort of like gradually just gets more severe and more severe. And when I'm single in my mid to late 20s. I'm working like crazy. I'm exercising like crazy, and it's very ritualistic, very much compulsive, like eating at the same time every single day with the same types of food. It's going to bed in a particular way, getting up and having the same exact routines. And it was, for me, inability to break those without having anxiety, without having a lot of emotional turmoil, unless I was to scratch that itch of compulsion to perform the exercise in a particular way, or the amount of calories or steps or counter that's on my fitness device. And I mean, like, if that was someone who was coming to you and kind of describing these habits, what maybe as a kind of a case of what coaching could look like, what would you start telling that person, asking that person, like say it was me when I'm 27, which was kind of the height of where all of this was occurring for me. What are some of the questions or tools that you would start to implement?
Well, the first thing is I would dial back their exercise program. The first thing I would do is give them tools like working in, right? So obviously, Paul Chek coined the term working in, and working in is really a way that we use movement, but in a way that's more parasympathetic. And that's the first thing because a lot of those types of people don't have the ability to yet like sit still and meditate, right? So to get that person to do some sort of mindfulness-based practice, utilizing movement is actually a great thing to do, but slowing the pace down, connecting with the breath, and doing it in a much more restorative way, that would be the first thing. The second thing is I would start to explore some other creative outlets, whether it be art or music or dance, drumming, rattling, anything that allows that person to express their creativity and move that energy in a way that's not so taxing on their body. And then, one of my favorite teachers, his name's Matt Kahn. Matt Kahn's one of my favorite spiritual teachers. And I remember in one of his workshops, he was working with someone that was struggling with addiction. And he said, and this always stuck with me, all addictions are when you're turning away from something that the universe is asking you to turn towards.
Wow.
And the addiction is what you use to turn away from exactly what you're being asked to turn towards. So then the process is really asking the question, what aspect of myself am I turning away from? Right? What aspect of myself am I using exercise as a means of turning away? And that's usually pretty obvious. Across the board, I would say most of those individuals still have some unresolved challenges with their father. And that was the case for me. That was the case for many clients I've worked with, where there was just this constant feeling inside of you of, it's not enough. It's not enough. I'm not enough. Whatever I do, it's never good enough. And for a lot of people, it's with their father. For others, it might be different. But it's what part of you are you really turning away from? And what's the emotion that you're unwilling to feel? It might be fear. It might be shame. But really connecting with that emotion. And one of the ways, for me, EFT is one of my favorite tools in helping a client just like gently get to that place where they can actually access that part of themselves. So I love doing tapping with clients. I find it very friendly and very gentle. It's not invasive. And it becomes an open exploration. And as they're tapping, it really starts to discharge a lot of that wind up. And it really kind of opens the door and creates space inside of them to start exploring a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
So those would be the first few steps.
Yeah, guys, if you're listening and wondering what tapping is, one, Greg goes into it in his course, so I would highly recommend checking that out. He does a beautiful job of outlining how this can work. But we've been practicing it the last 4 or 5 days as we've been getting into the coursework, and I've really never done it, and it is kind of a really unique way of just having a moment to let emotions out, release, relax.
Mhm.
Can you just like in 10 seconds describe a little bit about how that works exactly?
Yeah, so EFT is a tapping technique in which you're tapping on meridian points on the body. Well, a video is going to be posted for this podcast so
Yeah.
people can see me.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the tapping points, you start on your wrist. So it's kind of like your karate chopping. And you're very simply just tapping. And these are acupuncture or meridian points where a lot of kind of like stagnant or built up energy resides from certain emotions. And you would tap on the top of the head. And as you're tapping on these points, you're repeating out loud certain affirmations and stating exactly what you're struggling with. So, for example, you could say, even though I feel a lot of anxiety right now, I choose to love and accept myself and begin to let go now. Right. And then you would do a round of tapping. You go between the eyebrows, sides of the eyes, under the nose, under the lip, under the collarbones, on the rib cage. And you can just say, like, all this anxiety, all this anxiety that I'm feeling, all this stress that I'm feeling in my body. And the beauty of EFT is you're actually acknowledging how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And you're not trying to fix it. Right? You're just tapping on your body and you're just saying, I feel anxious right now. I feel guilty. I feel sad. I feel whatever it is. And then eventually you flip it and say, well, I choose to begin to let go now. I choose to trust the process. I choose to love and accept myself. And it's a very gentle way of actually engaging your emotions. And the tapping points on the body just really help start to discharge that energy. So it's easier for you to just kind of settle into yourself.
That's so great. Do you recommend this tapping technique simply for people who are maybe feeling like I feel an anxiety, or panic attack coming on, or I'm dealing with, really difficult emotions? Or is it something that we all could do, even if we feel somewhat balanced? We're not feeling any like negative emotions, almost in like a prophylactic way. Or maybe it's both.
It's both. I mean, it's great for like, heavily charged emotions. It's great for trauma. It's really great for working with people with any sort of unresolved trauma, but also just kind of like day-to-day stuff. It's really, really helpful. Sometimes before I go on podcasts, I do EFT. Just because there's still that child in me that's afraid of expressing himself. And so I'll just do a round of tapping, even though I feel nervous for this podcast. I choose to love and accept myself. And even though I feel stressed about this podcast, I choose to express myself fully and freely. So it's a very simple tool to have in your back pocket, like anytime. There's been times where like I'm driving and just with one hand, I'm just like kind of going through one side of my body. You don't really have to tap on both sides. You can just tap on one side of your body because the meridians on both sides are the same. So it's really both. It's great for kind of like deep healing work, but it's also great for just kind of day-to-day stuff that comes up.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you for giving our listeners that
Sure.
tool. It's something that's so simple. It could be overlooked or like kind of discarded because it's like, wait, just tapping on my body is going to help me heal this negative feeling or whatever it is. Which then leads me to some of the other tools that our society has been introduced to for things like anxiety, OCD, depression, which is medications, pharmaceuticals. What, in your opinion, is the role of medications when it comes to mental health issues, anxiety, OCD, depression?
I try and not be dogmatic where, obviously like Western medicine's all about medications, and it's easy for those in kind of like the holistic camp to kind of go to the other extreme and be like totally against anything that's, of the pharmaceutical model. But I always invite people to look at it as a last resort, like go after the lowest hanging fruit first, dial in all the basics, get your nutrition dialed in, your sleep, movements, Let's do some of the deeper healing work, address any unresolved emotions, relationships, a lot of the archetypes. And then after that, if you still feel like you need that support, then sure, let's entertain the idea of it. But I never want to put the cart before the horse.
Sure.
And I think for most people, there's so much low-hanging fruit that they can work with before they consider taking a medication that has serious side effects and a lot of long-term use consequences. So I wouldn't like completely rule it out. I have seen cases where sometimes the medication can actually create some space inside of them to do the healing work, and then they can wean themselves off. So there is a time and a place for it. But I always say, like, go after the low-hanging fruit. Let's do a lot of this kind of foundational work first, and then let's readdress that once we've kind of covered our bases. So that's the way I like to approach it is, you know, our culture and the medical and like science model in our kind of modern day, it's all about complexity, right? It's like this addiction to complexity. And with that, what happens is we overlook the power of simplicity. And I think that's why Paul's a very powerful teacher, is he really drills the basics. You know, he really dials in the basics. And the power of simplicity is real. And most people overlook it because we have this illusion that a complex problem needs a complex solution. Where someone's like clinical depression or whatever it might be could actually be more of a diet issue. They might not need like a bunch of pharmaceuticals. I mean, I've had clients, I remember I had a client a couple of years ago who came to me with like chronic sciatic nerve pain and lower back pain. And she had been to like 7 or 8 different like orthopedic specialists and had tried like 6 or 7 different medications. And obviously having studied with the Czech Institute and kind of learning kind of the interconnectedness of every system, I asked her about her gut health and about her bowel movements. And she was pooping like once a week. So I obviously learned through Paul's training that the colon can actually refer through the sciatic distribution and can actually be referral pain that people think is coming from the spine, but it's actually coming from an organ, because organs don't have pain receptors, so they refer their pain into the musculoskeletal system. So we worked on, in just one session, like doing some Tai Chi, cleaning up her diet, getting her well hydrated, and doing some like vagus nerve exercises, very simple stuff. And she started pooping better. And within like a week, her pain went away.
Wow.
And I never had to see her again. You know, so it's just like a complex issue can have a very simple solution.
That's such
but we overlook the power of the basics.
Yeah.
It's so perfect. Like when I was in financial consulting, I'm on an airplane every Monday and Friday. I'm in a very tense work environment, pretty aggressive, pretty political, lots of like corporate climbing up the ladder, big firm. And I was miserable, man. I'm you know, I was probably 135 to 140 pounds at the time, you know, sub 4% body fat, working out all the time, a lot of marijuana, you know, drinking to numb. And it's not that I went through a robust protocol of coaching and therapy. I left that career and I moved into a place that felt like a community of family, a business that I was a part of starting that was like significantly more healthy, just in every way possible. And those things started to fall off. There was more work to be had, especially as it pertains to some of the compulsive behavior and healing the wound of our divorce. But some of those glaring issues, like my physical wellness, started to improve literally by just changing my environment and the individuals that I was around. And it can be that simple. So it's like a beautiful point.
Yeah, and would add to that, echoing, we had completely different experiences, but they were mirrors of each other when we were divorced. And Chase was going through the journey that he just explained, and I was also in a really unhealthy state. And I also had to heal my relationship first to food and movement were my, like, it was like the segue into these higher levels of self-development and spirituality and healing. But after years of being in a deficit, a caloric deficit, of course, the rest of me, including my psyche and my emotional body, is going to also feel depressed because I was depressed from a caloric standpoint. So just eating enough food, which I'm speaking to all the women out there, men too, but for sure the women, we are taught by our society, by culture, to constantly want to be smaller, slimmer, toner, fitter, like more toned, I should say, not toner. But we're just fed that lie that you need to be smaller. You need to look a particular way. And so the answer that we get from modern diet culture is to suppress and to depress and to reduce our amount of energy intake and calories. So I was doing that for years. And as soon as I started just addressing that, I had to, because my face was blowing up in acne, I had no stomach acid, and my hair was falling out in clumps. I had no other choice. I was like, I got to figure this out. So I took 6 weeks off of exercise, which was a huge step for me. It was really grueling for me to take that first step. But I just felt in my intuition, as cut off from it as I was, I just felt this, like, I think I need to take a break from HIIT workouts and, cardio and all of that. And so I just did walking and yoga. That was my, kind of similar experience as Chase just shared, where it was just like this one first step in the right direction. And then it's like a veil is lifted and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to tackle these other things.
Yeah.
And there's no question in there, but
yeah, everyone has their version of that.
Yeah.
And I think we all have our hero's journey, and it's usually you have to do the one thing that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And you have to give up the one thing you don't want to give up. And that's where the saboteur archetype lies.
Yeah.
Right? The saboteur is how we protect ourselves from a certain truth. Right? The saboteur is how we protect ourselves from our own empowerment and from our own, from the truth that we don't want to look at.
Yeah.
Whether it's, I hate my job, or this relationship's not working, or whatever it might be, the saboteurs do whatever you can to protect yourself from the truth that we don't want to look at. Because once we come face to face with this truth, it's going to be really inconvenient.
Yeah.
Right? Like leaving my job is going to be inconvenient.
Yeah.
Leaving this relationship is unknown and inconvenient. So like the saboteur is like, let's just kind of stay put, and to avoid that truth, just keep exercising. Just keep drinking, just keep whatever it might be. But that's really the crux of the saboteur archetype, is how we protect ourselves from truth.
Yeah, that's great. And I think this is a perfect segue into getting into the other survival archetypes. And so we talked about the saboteur, and what's the when the awareness is there and you are self-identifying with this version of the survival archetype, how do you then, is it to identify it and then take the leap into whatever you're avoiding?
Well, when it comes to the archetypes, I would say at least 50% of it is just the awareness.
Yeah.
Just the awareness of, oh, this is my saboteur, or, oh, this is my victim, or, oh, this is my child or prostitute. For example, I learned my victim. We learn all of these archetypes when we're very young, because they're survival archetypes. So these are the archetypes that you adopted from a very young age just to ensure your own survival. My victim archetype, for example, started when I was very young, where, I didn't feel a deep emotional connection to my father, but he was a doctor. So anytime I was in pain, my mom would take me to his office and I would get the best treatment from my dad, the nurses, his partners. So the victim inside of me was like, oh, so when I'm in pain, I get more love from dad.
Wow.
So that gives birth to the saboteur, which is like, I don't really want to get healthy. I don't really want to get out of pain because I'm getting so many of my emotional needs met by staying exactly where I am, by staying in pain, by staying sick, whatever it might be. So it's really important to, step one, have the awareness of the pattern and the archetype. Step two, start to explore, where did I learn how to do this? And then step three is, whatever need was getting met at that time, I can now get that need met in a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where understanding those archetypes are really powerful. Is awareness, what's the origin, and how can I get that need met in a more empowered way?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, beautiful.
So we talked about victim, saboteur, prostitute. What about child?
Well, the victim, saboteur, and prostitute come after the child, right? So the child is the first. So the child archetype, remember, when you're born and you're a child, you're completely helpless. You're completely dependent on mom and dad or whoever your caretakers are to take care of you and to keep you alive. So essentially, the child archetype is the helpless, powerless part of you that the victim, saboteur, and prostitute are all there to try and protect. So it's almost like the child's in the middle, and you have this archetypal survival team that are all there to protect that helpless, powerless part of you. So that's where all of the other survivals are born out of. So that's really the root of it, is the child archetype.
Yeah, I've heard Paul talk about this many times. Of course, we all know what the child archetype is. These are just, forms that we're all, or I forget the exact definition of archetype, but it's like this psychic form, like an anchor point that lets us move through life and kind of identify what we're coming into contact with, whether it's externally or internally. I've heard Paul talk about the child archetype quite a bit and how he's seeing collectively that there's a lot of the child archetype in the world globally, kind of in this state of, I don't know what to do. I'm going to look to authorities to tell me what to do and how to have a happy or healthy life. I'm curious, from you, maybe with your work with your clients as of late, looking back on the past 2+ years of this global pandemic crisis, whatever you want to call it, what are you seeing pop up from a mental health capacity in your clients and collectively? Like, are you seeing the child archetype everywhere, or what is it to you that you're seeing?
Well, the child's archetype is the part of us that outsources the power of choice, right? And that's just a very obvious pattern right now.
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years, is outsourcing the power of choice, right? So the child doesn't really want to take responsibility for its own choices. It wants some sort of authority to tell it what to do. Because with the responsibility of choice, comes the consequences. So if we're not ready to deal with the consequences of our own choices, we're going to outsource that as much as possible. And that's where in my client coaching work, I'll always present things to my clients as an invitation, not I'm telling you to do this.
Yeah.
It's I'm inviting you to consider this, and then you make your own choice. And a lot of times I'll work with someone that has a really strong child archetype that might say, well, can you just write me a diet plan? Or can you just tell me what to do? Or whatever it is. But that's really the child archetype projecting me as the parent.
Yeah.
And I have to be very careful with this too, because a lot of my teachers and mentors are also like professional, like psychic and intuitives and mediums. and people that are really, really tapped in. So I always have to check myself, because it's very easy for that child archetype to come up inside of me and just kind of like want a clear reading.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
well, tell me if I should really do this. Like,
Yeah.
you're the fortune teller,
Right.
So, I mean, luckily my teachers are conscious enough to never tell me what to do, but give me the tools to access the answer that's already within.
Mm.
So, that's where the child archetype really shows up, and is just that power of choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and coming really full circle to your initial point when we asked you the question of what you could gift to others, and you talked about purpose. And I think having a purpose that is strong enough will allow you to see that that purpose won't be met or embodied until you are graduated out of the child archetype.
Mhm.
Because purpose living, dream living, legacy building isn't done by outsourcing the work or the liability to someone else. And I think that could be a formula for why so many people are challenged with depression and anxiety, is that they haven't yet completed that hero's journey. They haven't yet completed that loop of there is resistance and it's challenging, and I have to bring it upon myself to work through it and find the light on the other side and enjoy the reward of that. Rather, it's this like, I don't feel good, I need somebody to take care of this for me.
Yeah. And also it's very interesting, because there's two sides to that coin. And what you said is very true, which is like the child is like, this is what I think I have to do.
Mhm.
And when you have purpose, it's this is what I'm choosing to do.
Yeah.
Right. But also, a lot of people's purpose and their life gifts, actually, if you explore the light side of the child archetype, you had those gifts as a child. So if you really dive into the child archetype, you might also find your purpose there.
Wow.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Right. Like a lot of healers were very psychic and intuitive as a child, but they lost those gifts along the way because of various reasons.
Yeah.
So a lot of finding your purpose actually involves reclaiming the child archetype and all the gifts that were inside of there. So that's the light side of the child, and letting go of the shadow side.
Yeah.
Cool.
Almost like connecting with it, healing if there's trauma there or stories built up, but not living from that.
Sure.
Like a genuine, loving, compassionate connection with your inner child. I've definitely felt that in my life, where I don't know if you know Roseanne Grace, I'm sure you do. She has worked with us and kind of connecting with our inner child. And that sounds so cliche now, because there's more and more people who are on Instagram and helping others connect with their inner child. But I really do believe that this is such important work for every human. Not only is it connecting us, like you said, to our potential legacy and purpose and gifts, but also play, which is something that Paul Chek talks about all the time. When did you stop playing? When did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing? All that is play. And unfortunately, as adults, I think so many of us have forgotten how to play. And certainly in our relationship, when we were at our sickest was when we weren't playing together anymore. And it's one of those things, again, that is so simple that we overlook it and look for a more complex solution to our problems. But that's such a good reminder. Thank you for that explanation. I would love to give you a few minutes here to talk about your course. It's so wonderful. It is absolutely top-notch, well done. The way that you formatted everything, it's incredible. We've gotten to go through it and see the back end, and really we've taken some of the tools into our own life, and it's brought up awesome conversation between us. Can you explain to the listeners a little bit about your course and how you approached creating it for people?
Yeah, so the Healing the Mind course was something that I really gave birth to as an expression of my own healing journey, the tools that I implemented over those years, and a lot of the work that I've done over the last 10 years with my clients. So it was a program that was really born out of those two experiences of my healing journey, and then applying all of that in my one-on-one coaching practice, and then seeing really, okay, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, and sift through all of that. And now I finally was able to put together a 21-day program. And I broke it up into 3 one-week modules. And it was just a nice steady progression of like week 1, module 1, which was foundations, which is really about dialing in the foundational principles like we talked about, like always simplicity before complexity, which is your nutrition, sleep, breath, movements, all of these very basic principles that, you know, Paul teaches, that we all teach, and we can't skip that. So week 1, module 1 is foundations. And then the second week, we dive a little bit deeper. There's some different meditations. There's the core archetypes. There's our core addictions. There's some work on healing the shadow, working with the inner child. And then week 3, which is my favorite, which is where we start to really harmonize with a lot of the laws of nature, right? We work with the seasons and the elements and the rhythms and cycles and the polarities. And we realize that so much of our challenges are really a result of imbalances in those laws. And we realize that as human beings, we are an expression of nature, and therefore we must live according to the laws of nature. So it's really just kind of like a reharmonizing in week 3. And I find week 3 to be kind of like very grounding. So it's a nice 3-week progression. And, you know, I've had a lot of people reach out to me for coaching. And, you know, one of the greatest things that I've heard from people that have taken the course was they reached out to me for coaching. I said, look, I'm not taking on new clients right now, but start with the program, do the 21 days. And after 3-4 weeks, if you still need me, let's kind of like reassess. And I've had a lot of people that really felt great after the 3 weeks, and they didn't really need me after that. So, you know, that's my goal, is for you to not need me again. Which that was my intention of the program, is just to really take the absolute essentials that I would take any client through, no matter what they're struggling with, and then just be able to deliver that to someone to go through it really on their own time in their own home. So that was really my intention behind the program.
Yeah, I love it. It's so well done and perfectly crafted. And what I was noticing is, as I was going through it, you know, it's called healing the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
healing the mind. But it's not just, I think, not just for people. I think it could benefit people who, you know, have maybe some mental health issues that they're working through, but also physical health issues, like you're talking about. So it's, I just want to relate that to the listener, that, you know, if you've gone through a ton of different doctors and labs and this and that, and no one can get to the bottom of what you're dealing with on a physical level, I think that this course could really help those people as well.
Absolutely. And that just shows that, you know, root cause medicine is really the fact that whatever the symptomology is, it could be anxiety and it could be lower back pain, and the root cause can be exactly the same.
Yeah.
You know, so the work that you have to do, no matter what you're struggling from, is usually the same anyway. So yeah, I really appreciate that insight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Guys, we're going to leave a link in the show notes to check out the course and where you can get it. Craig, before we sign off, and obviously being mindful of time, we got one more question for you. We ask every guest on the medicine, and that is, you know, the medicine is all about relationships, and it's expanding those relationships into, sure, you're with your partner, but it's with yourself, and it's with nature, and it's with others. So we like to ask people what they feel like are medicines for their life in the lanes of medicine for relationships, medicine for mind, and medicine for body. So we'll start with your body. What currently feels like medicine for your body?
What feels like medicine for my body is getting my bare feet out on the earth, just grounding myself in nature with my feet on the earth, with as little clothing on as possible, and just getting the sun, getting the earth, breathing, moving. So I would say just grounding in nature would be what's medicinal for my body right now.
Love it. What about for your mind? What currently feels like medicine?
For me, meditation has always been just like my anchor, just connecting with my breath, following my breath, repeating a mantra if I need. But also something I've been getting into a little bit more recently is toning, where I'm using sound vibration as a form of meditation. And I find that to be so medicinal for my mind. So what I use is the do re mi scale, which correlates with the 7 chakras.
Yeah.
Paul actually got me into that many years ago, but I hadn't utilized it as much as I am now. So that's actually been so medicinal for my mind, is just the vibration of sounds that I create internally.
Oh, I love that. It's so good.
Yeah, I love that. Lastly, what feels like medicine for your relationship or relationships?
What feels like medicine for my relationships? I would say what we talked about earlier, which is play. I think play is the most important medicine for relationships. And sure, there's always, deep healing work to do and things to explore. But if you're not playing, then you're just taking it all too seriously. And I think even like myself in all of this kind of like healing work, it can be very easy for me to take things too seriously. So whether it's just like putting on music and like dancing with my partner and singing and just kind of being silly, like that to me is the most medicinal aspect of it.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally feel that. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. I feel like this went by in a flash. We are so grateful to know you in this life and to know your work and to be able to extend your gifts to the world, to our listeners and people that we love. Where can people find your course, find more about you and all that, all the good stuff?
So my home base is my website, healing4d.com. So that's healing the number 4d.com. Then the online program, the Healing the Mind, is healing4d.com/HTM. And if your listeners use the code podcast20, they can save 20% off if they want to get started on that. And you guys will have the course link that I'll send to you guys. So healing4d.com is the website. Healing4d.com/HTM is the course. And then 4D Healing is my Instagram. Instagram's the one social media that I'm on. And I usually post pretty regularly, just some educational content. So those are the best places to find me.
Perfect. Yeah, you guys just check the show notes. I'll have everything down there for you. Check Greg out, check out his course. If this resonated with you at all, if you feel a nudge or a twinge or just something in his voice or his calming energy is inviting you into deeper work into yourself, follow that nudge. I think that those nudges, when we follow them, listen to them, that's the opportunity for massive change, transformation. We just have to listen to them because they're whispers. They're not always going to be a yell or a shout. So
and share this conversation with somebody. Everybody knows somebody who is going through this if you are not yourself. And these are the types of conversations that can be the nudge towards healing, towards purpose. And so give it a share, whether that's on social, word of mouth, whatever. We're into sharing this thing. So thank you so much for being on, Greg. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, such a blast. All right, you guys, go check out Greg and we'll see you next time. Go spread some light. Okay, bye.